I think we can just dive. I think we
Yeah.
can just dive right in. What is the mission of Finding Paola and FemGem?
So Finding Paola and FemGem are two different things. And in the beginning, when I started Finding Paola, I moved to New York City. I was 21. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college. I remembered moving to New York after college because I wanted to chase my dreams, right? And I didn't know what they were. I had a summer job, I had a few $100s saved, and I paid the first and last month deposit, and I moved to this apartment in Washington Heights, and I had 3 roommates or 2 roommates. Yes, I was the third one. And I remembered finding that space and securing a job as a research assistant at Columbia. And then I quickly realized that was not my dream because one, I was living in this tiny space in Washington Heights. I was working, though I was grateful, with a lot of doctors, and I was working in this windowless room putting together all of these meetings that honestly I was not passionate about. So I thought that I had to get out of my comfort zone and find really what I wanted. So I started this blog only for me, not even for an audience, on WordPress. And I called it Finding Paola, where I would put myself outside of my comfort zone. I would go downtown and figure life out. And it turns out that if you don't have a lot of money in New York City, there's not maybe much you can explore unless you become more open-minded. So I started going to gallery openings. I couldn't afford the art, but they were free. Or I started doing a lot of things in the East Village. They had all these underground bars. I started meeting a lot of people that I thought were so fascinating and artistic. And I started hanging out with them. And so I had 2 lives, basically, one uptown, one downtown. So the mission really was a personal thing. It was not to inspire anyone. It was to make me reach the life I thought I wanted, although I didn't really know what that was at the moment. All I knew was that whatever was happening at that time was not what I wanted. And I think sometimes that is enough. So one of the women who lived in the apartment, I just sent her an email. I told her I thought the party was so nice and that I'd like to hang out again. And I invited her to do yoga. And at that time, Groupon was my favorite thing because you could get all these classes for $45 and then you move up and down. So I invited her to yoga and we became friends. And she said, you should start a blog. You're pretty interesting. And I was like, well, I already have one, but no one knows about it. And at that time, she and her friends had this lifestyle blog and it was super popular. So she interviewed me for it. And her audience loved me. And that's when I started getting people reading my blog more and more, which was very different than theirs. They talked about fashion, they talked about going out, and I talked about truly finding myself, coming into terms, and just talked about what really made me me or what I was finding out about myself. And then one day I posted a photo of myself and I was wearing red lipstick and an afro, just my natural hair. And then people started asking me about the lipstick and all of these different things. And I was like, I'm writing about this event I went to and they're raising money for Haiti, but people were not asking about the event. They were asking about what I was wearing and the lipstick and how I did my hair, which somehow shifted a lot of what I started posting on my blog because people cared about that stuff. And then so right now, obviously years and years later, because that was back in 2009, I think the mission for Finding Paola is really to give myself permission to be who I want to be and all that I want to be. And then in turns, if I can do that and express that, then maybe someone else could give themselves that permission. But I don't want to inspire or motivate anymore. I just want to be me, whatever that is at the moment. And for FemGem, my company, starting it with 8 head wraps in my studio apartment in Harlem, not thinking the name would ever leave, the space. I used to just pack up my head wraps and go to these different Harlem fairs and markets and just sell my head wraps to people, The mission really was to truly embrace yourself. And I like using the phrase "live colorfully" or boldly, but it's not truly to be always colorful, but it's to be that in your own terms. And I think that's what I've been able to do with the company, creating this community of women who just ask themselves, what if they didn't have to try to squeeze or conform into whatever it is that society thought they had to be? What if the lawyer could walk into court wearing a head wrap? What if the bride wore a head wrap to get married? Why is that a political statement? Why can't it be the norm?
So from finding yourself with finding Paola to Femme Jam, which means strong women, there's definitely this thread in your evolution of self and your brand of embracing women to be who they want to be. How did you end up pivoting so that you developed skills as a photographer and also embracing Black culture to create that thread?
I think I will forever be a curious person, right? And I always tell people, where you don't have the money, you have to spend the time. Or both. In order to get anything done, if you don't have the money to get it done, you have to spend the time. And when I started Femme Jam, I had a lot of friends who were doing favors. I called out a photographer friend who used to photograph my portraits all the time. And I said, listen, I want to start this project. I don't have any money. I'll buy you lunch, come on my rooftop. And that's how the first photo shoot happened. And as you grow, obviously you can't keep paying people. You can't keep paying people with food because people have to live, right? And there are times where I would hire a photographer to do what I need to do, but I've always been really passionate about storytelling and all of its forms, and photography and writing and speaking. So then one day I decided that I wanted to try it, because what was happening was that I would put together all of these things, spend time because I didn't have the money, and then I would have someone photograph it, but then the person would get the credit. Not that I want to be at the forefront all the time, but that's also kind of hurtful, because as a woman, it's hard for you to advance, and then you put together everything and then the credit goes to someone else. So I decided I would pick up the camera. And I also thought that I could photograph certain women in a different way than some of my male counterparts, the men I was collaborating with all the time. I can truly see them. So I wasn't looking for sexual appeal. I wasn't looking for someone being hot. I was looking for them, for who they truly were. And I think I can capture that. And often that's what I like to do with my photography. And one thing I've been trying to do lately actually is going more into personal projects versus, okay, I have to shoot this for Femme Jam, let's get it there. Because I know I have so much more to offer in that world. But that's how I started photography. And growing up and not being sure of myself, there are things that I've put myself into, like even starting photography, where I can tell you that I have a really great eye for color. And I probably would have never been able to say that if I didn't put myself in that world where I was shaking. I remembered I paid these models, I booked this Airbnb in Brooklyn, I had a makeup artist, I was paying, everyone was on the clock, and I was like, oh, I have a camera and I have to actually capture this. Otherwise, I lose all of my money. Yeah. So I had to show up for myself. And I think a lot of what I do is just kind of like showing up for myself. And when things don't go the way I plan for them to, I always have something to learn. So I pivot my mindset where I think, okay, this was a fail, but I learned something and it won't happen again. But it continues to happen. You fail in different ways, but that's okay, but that's how you grow.
I think from an audience perspective, there's a really nurturing quality about your photography. In every picture, I feel nurtured by the woman versus, there are a lot of imagery that feel more sexual, whereas it's very holistic what you're producing. How did you find yourself through your art?
Thank you. I don't know if I found myself through my art. I feel like I didn't know I was creative until I was maybe 25, right? I'm 35 now, and I didn't pick up my first camera maybe, 5 years ago, right? I think I wanna create what I wanna see. And although I've been seeing some things that I've wanted to see since I was younger, it's still not enough. And I think there's so much power in simplicity sometimes. So I like to photograph my I would say, my subjects and different environments that basically when I'm looking at the image, they're just being. And it's so hard to get a model sometimes to tell them not to pose. Like, just be, just like sit here for me. And they're like pointing their toes or like doing something. And I go, no, just like, I'm not here. And it's so funny because I found myself too loving photographing people without experience, because there's a challenge for me. Just basically telling them that just being here is enough. Like, that is the beauty I'm looking for versus what does she really want to see from me, you know? And I think that's what I started finding, that beauty is not what you see, it's what you feel. And that's what I live by. And I go, I have to make them feel beautiful, because then they'll just be beautiful, you know? And I think for me, my photography is so much more meaningful when I'm in the act of doing it versus what you see. I don't think I can ever capture how I feel when I photograph a woman, especially one who's not used to being photographed. And listening to them after whatever the session or whatever that is, and how they feel at the moment. It's priceless.
Have you always embraced your Haitian identity?
Always. Absolutely. I moved here when I was 12 in the States, and being a young Haitian woman, you're going into high school, it's rough out there because people have all these stereotypes about Haiti and Haitian people. And I would guarantee that any kid who moved in to the States in the early 2000s or the 90s, being of Haitian descent, they had to fight. They had to physically fight to prove that they belong there, or run, or try to fit in some other ways. And I've never been ashamed, because that's just always who I was, and I knew my history enough to be proud of it, no matter what people said, you know? I just remembered being in college. If I introduced myself, the first two things I would say is, my name is Paola, I'm from Haiti. You already knew, that was my bio, you know? And then even with FemJam, which is a challenge in itself, because I'm starting this company from scratch with nothing, you know? And then I decide to call it something most people can't pronounce when they see it. Every time I call a business for a service and they go, what's your email address? I have to take my time and F as in Frank, and like spell it letter by letter. But the reason I chose that was because FemJam to me meant so much more than the words themselves. Being strong woman, being raised around strong women, whatever that means. And then being from a culture where the local economy is only supported by the women. And it's funny because now I've noticed there are a lot of Black women and successful Black women in different spaces, and they talk about living a soft life, which is what we all dream about. Not wanting to live up to that strong Black woman stereotype, because they're tired. They just want to live. They want to show up somewhere, kick their feet up, frolic, you know, dance, where they don't have to feel like they're carrying their family, they're carrying their community all the time. And so calling FemJam that, or the company that, has taught me so much about myself and what strength truly meant too. And strength is vulnerability too. And strength is leaning to your community. Strength is so many things that I never even thought about. So it's this thing where I'm constantly learning something more every time. And people get to learn that FemJam means strong woman in Haitian Creole. It's kind of like, that's just like another way of introducing my country and where I'm from to the world. It's so fun. And then I always said if people could say Yves Saint Laurent, they could say FemJam. They just have to try. And you did.
I did, but several times.
Yeah.
FemJam.
Right.
Growing up, you talked about growing up as Haitian, and you're automatically standing out. But how did you fit in while standing out? How did you find that balance?
You know what? Growing up, I was very shy. You see how we're making eye contact? Could not make eye contact with anyone. My voice was shaking all the time, and I don't know, it took me a while to get out of that. So I was a fly on the wall, and I'm so glad I was, because I got to observe the world where no one saw me. Or at least I thought they did. I don't know. I mean, I was tall and lanky. People saw me coming, but like once I sat down, I was just super quiet, and I just got to observe and learn, because I learned English when I got here in school. And the school I went to, I lived in Newark for a while. They didn't have an ESL program. So they just threw me right in class where I didn't know any English. So I had to learn math or learn all of the things. And the first few months were a blur, but I was an avid reader. I was reading a lot, and I was watching some TV with subtitles, and that's what got me to catch up eventually. But I think I blended in because I made myself invisible, you know? And then eventually, after a while, after observing, because the culture was so different. I went to an all-girl Catholic school in Haiti where everyone had the same white socks and the uniform, and everything had to be pristine, and everyone had to speak a certain way to their elders and whoever were in the room. Versus I walk into a room and everyone, like, I'm telling you, it was a madhouse. I'd never experienced anything like that before. And there were so many culture shocks everywhere. But that also has to say with even the education system in the United States, it was just pure chaos, right? And I remembered my first week there, my math teacher had a table thrown at her and she was out for the rest of the semester. So I just learned to kind of like, it's okay if no one knows who I am right now. I'm just going to study what's happening in the room. What makes a girl cool? What makes this guy a bully? Why is he a bully? Is he really afraid of how people perceive him, so he has to be the tough guy? And I used to just sit there and people used to just tell me everything because I was the quiet Haitian girl. So I just kind of like listened to everyone, you know? And then eventually after I started finding my voice, I noticed that I loved color. So I started wearing colorful stuff. I was made fun of, you know, Skittles, like, where are you going with this? And I was fine with it. And I remembered one of the bigger things that happened in school, I shaved my head, just kind of like a bald cut, right? 11th grade, and I walked in the bus to go to school, and of course all the girls started laughing, all of the things. And then I remember thinking, you know, it's okay. I just remembered like trembling in my seat, just like, as long as they don't try to fight me or anything, I'm good, you know? And then a month or so went by after people were like chuckling when I walked in the cafeteria. They were like, actually, this looks good on you. I like it, you know? And then I realized that nothing is ever, sometimes you do have to do things where people laugh or you're shaking in your seat. Otherwise, you're just gonna live a life where you're trying to make people happy all the time and you never get to experience what you truly want to experience. So yeah, I don't know if I ever blended in. I was either invisible or I stood out, and I was okay with both at that time, at those times.
Why a head wrap? What's the significance of a head wrap to you?
So when I was younger,
Yeah.
we were talking about hair just before this started, right? And I remembered I had my first relaxer when I was 4 years old, my daughter's age now. And a relaxer is this creamy product that you put in someone's hair to take it from curly or really coarse hair to straight. But the thing is, if you don't apply it properly, your scalp could get burnt. So these women, they apply this relaxer because they wanted me to look presentable, and because according to them, my hair was just too coarse and it burned my scalp. I remembered screaming that it was burning, and they said, you know what, to be beautiful, you have to suffer. And I was like, but it's burning. I remember crying. And then eventually they rinsed it out. And I spent months just like picking at the scabs on my scalp. Like it literally burned my scalp, right? And I started looking at myself in the mirror at that young age. And I'm telling you this because I had a conversation with my husband who's from Vermont, right? And he said, it's so funny that, you know, you were looking at yourself in the mirror when you were so young, because I never really looked in the mirror because looks were never this thing that was important to me. And I said, what you just said is what privilege is. The fact that you never thought about it. Whereas, you know, children as young as 4 or 5 are asking themselves, what is wrong with me? What's wrong with my skin? What's wrong with my nose? What's wrong with my hair? And then those thoughts basically carry them through life where it's hard for them to ever truly understand what their purpose are, what they're meant to do in this world, right? Anyway, I'm standing in front of the mirror, And I washed my face. And I was like, I'm not as ugly as people think I am. I swear I thought that, right? And I had my grandmother.
4 years old, and you're
I was pretty young, and I'm telling you that I think I go back to 4 because that's when I had my first relaxer. But I was pretty young, and I was in Haiti, and I had my great grandmother's scarf on. It was just this regular satin or silk scarf, and I just had it tied, and my face was wet, and it was a broken mirror somewhere downstairs before school. And I remember thinking, I don't feel ugly, and that was it. That was my first true interaction or experience with a head wrap where I felt like I was okay, right? And then I remembered moving here. I shaved my head a second time in college, and I just started embracing the head wrap. And every time I wore it, someone either had something funny to say about it, or they asked me if it was a political statement. And I was just like, I'm really just wrapping my hair because I like how it makes me feel. It makes me stand taller. I love how it makes me look. And there are a lot of women who I started admiring, like Maya Angelou was wearing head wraps. I started looking at different women who came before me who were wearing head wraps, Nina Simone, and I thought, okay, that's definitely one of my staple accessories, right? And then I moved to Harlem. I'm at the middle of everything. All these West African aunties with their colorful outfits with their matching head wraps. And that's when I really started embracing it. I used to just go to the fabric shops and pick out a few prints, and I started wearing them. And then people just started calling me the tall lady with the head wrap. And that's before Femme Jam, you know? And so that's why the head wrap is there. It's because it's an extension of Black hair and Black beauty and Black culture. It makes me feel taller. It is more than an accessory. It is a form of protective styling, and it carries so many meanings across the African diaspora. So yeah, and I continue to find more things out about it every time. My husband was reading this book about the Great Migration, and there's this one line in it where someone was giving advice to a Black woman, and they were like, please don't wear head wraps because then you won't be hired. They won't take you seriously. You know, it's kind of like taking something like this and turning it into something you can walk in and it's a statement piece. Well, to me,
traditionally head wraps were more of something someone wore saying that they weren't ready. They were just wrapping up their hair to get ready.
Yeah.
And you know,
depending on the culture, right? Okay. Because West African culture, you have Nigerian women, the bigger the head wrap, the fancier the occasion. Okay. You know? And even the Tignon in Louisiana with the women where they were telling Black women one thing, and then they took the Tignon and transformed it into this great, you know, fashion accessory, and that itself was another issue, you know? And it really depends on the culture, because head covering, it exists everywhere, right? True. But for sure, a lot of, I think one of the main challenges I had was to encourage women to say, okay, you don't have to wear this just to run errands. You could wear this and show up and take space, you know? And growing up, that was, you're right, you know, you're tying your head, you don't have time, you have to hurry up, get out of the house, and that's it. And now I love the idea of a ritual of taking your time to wrap your head to show up somewhere. Yeah.
Now, Femme Jam really became an Instagram success. It was built based off of these beautiful curated images and yourself and your background with the blog. Can you tell us about how you built this, you know, really $1 million business through Instagram?
It was, it's interesting because I remember the first photo shoot I had, it went viral on Tumblr. Remember Tumblr? Anyway, so that's where a lot of Black bloggers were, right? And it was something new enough that everyone was reblogging. And then when we went to the platform with Instagram, I think the thing is producing images that you want your community to see or they can relate to or react to. And stepping, again, outside of my comfort zone, saying, what if this woman is sitting here reading a book? Although that is a very common thing, wearing a head wrap.
Yeah.
Right? That in itself was so beautiful that people loved seeing those images of just someone sitting down reading a book in a head wrap, where so many people have done them, and because there weren't enough images to show these things, then I think that's what brought Femme Jump here where it is. Obviously now it's very different because people have caught up to the powers of social media, right? And we have to, I think as business owners, you have to adapt and, you know, shift things, but then also keep true to your voice and your message and who you are. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride for 8 years, starting, you know, from nothing and then using social media and Instagram as this kind of like platform where I could share my ideas. And I think back then too, I think now that I'm a little bit more experienced, I think I was more fearless back then. I was telling someone that, where I could look a mess, I show up there and I go, this is what I'm doing, guys. And now I feel like although it's probably a good thing where, you know, you strategize things, you calculate, you see how things are. But then sometimes it's good to not be perfect. It's good to just be human. And one thing I've always wanted to do is make sure the brand says, you know, the brand just represents the people I'm trying to reach, not everyone, like we're talking, while we're still able to grow, which is obviously a challenge, right? Because especially because when I started, I had absolutely no experience. I was undercharging, and then there are so many things that are important to me, like making things locally or making things ethically, and making sure the supply chain, whoever's making or whoever's folding or packaging, I'm not taking advantage of or exploiting anyone. Everything just happens by this very small group of people, and it's hard, you know? But that's not even what you asked me. I'm just saying, that's just what happens.
Was there ever a time where you feel like you were gonna fail, or you felt like you wanted to quit?
All the time. They were just always great reminders. Because I'm always taking leaps and risks that I do something and I think, oh no, I don't know. Even when I moved from my studio apartment to this little office space, I was like, will I be able to afford this? I'm not starting with funding. You know, my parents, they couldn't afford to send me to college. I had to pay off my student loans years and years later. So there's no backup. Once it happens, the thing is now I'm okay with failing. If something doesn't work out, I'm not going to beat up myself about it. I'm just going to try my hardest. And there are so many things that just don't work out even in business. And then you have to find a way to make other things work to make up for it, you know?
Have you ever experienced a time with Finding Paola where, you know, maybe a brand exploited you, or what's the like I feel screwed, uncensored part of Finding Paola?
Ooh, I think in general, when it comes to signing a contract with a brand, I am very, very selective. And there are times where I feel like when they take away my creative control, even if after I sign the contract and I deliver and they want to come back, no matter how much they've paid me, I tell them I'm not interested. The one time though I felt like I was probably taken advantage of, that was different. So I think about 4 years ago, I was approached by a casting agency where a huge cosmetics company, like one of the biggest ones, wanted to cast me to be a model for one of their new products. It's just like a new product launch, and they would fly me to New York. I would shoot it. It was this whole day thing, and then it was just the U.S. market, just kind of like they would use my photo just for the U.S. market, not worldwide. And I remember that was before representation, and I was very thorough about going through every page and Googling, what does perpetuity mean? What does, all these different things, right? And I remembered, and I think that was probably the contract that made me understand what perpetuity and all these other things were. So that had nothing to do with social media because I didn't have to post about it, but it was more of a modeling gig, which was not even something that I was pursuing. And at that time, the casting agency said, this brand is really interested in you. As I think I already had Zilly as a new mom, and they want you to send a casting video. It was like a casting video. This is so strange. I've never done that before, but I was intrigued, so I did it. Set up my phone, and I did all the things, and I was selected. And at that time, I had blonde hair. Very short blonde hair. Just like I was going through a moment. I still liked it. But anyway, so then they came back and said, congratulations, the brand really liked you. They would only hire you if you dyed your hair back to black. And I said, that's not a thing. I'm not going to do it because that's my hair at the moment. And because I was feeling the hair so much that I was like, if I dyed it back to black, I can't get it back to blonde anytime soon. So I passed. And it was a pretty good contract. It's not even like I'm balling. I don't even know why I use that term. It's not even like I was so financially, stable or secure that I should have passed it, but I was just like very firm. I said, this hair or no hair or no Paola, right? And then they came back and they said, okay, fine. Well, you're hired. So they flew me to New York, and I remember staying at a hotel, and this car picked me up, and I was like, this is awesome, because I didn't live that life. And I showed up on set, and everything was great. But then I think months and months later, this person was somewhere in the world, maybe Australia, but far enough away that I was just like, and they were like, oh my God, this is finding Paola in this huge Sephora or something. It was like, wait a minute, this isn't part of the deal. I thought it was US market only. And that's when I started really looking into all those things. And I think I reached out to them. And it's so strange because they're casting agencies, and then there are these kind of like social media agencies that reach out to you as the middleman. And then now I'm represented by another agency. So sometimes there are all these different agencies talking to each other, and then the talent and the brand is there. But I'm just really happy once I finally signed with my agency after being approached, because I really didn't put too much value on being a full-time influencer. And I'm still not. I take a lot of gigs, but my priorities right now are my kids and my business, FumJam. And then creating content, mostly for myself, but then sometimes with the brands that align. That's how I categorize things, right? And it's worked for me because it makes my life less stressful. I'm not trying to attract anyone. Sometimes some brands reach out to me and I think, wow, this is crazy that, these people know who I am, right? But I still think less about the name and more about, how do I feel going into this? Does this really represent me? And sometimes the way I'm spoken to by the agency that reaches out to me will make me just not even go on with the deal. If I feel like they find me as a number, more like, okay, this brand really wants to work with you. Okay, here's the contract. But then I feel some kind of weird, and the thing about creating content in general, you're never given enough time. It's never like the fastest turnaround, no matter what. And often I'm approached because of all of that I do, as whatever it is that I put out there as a mom and a business owner, but then everything is still needed in 48 hours or less. So sometimes I have to have boundaries. I will not be texted at 9 p.m. after I'm done putting my kid to bed and I'm trying to wash dishes and get ready the next day about something, and I think finding my voice in that power where I say, okay, I will deliver, I will do what I'm supposed to do, but with respect. And the reason I became that way is because I worked with one brand once that really showed me what respect was. And I was like, wait, brands can actually respect people and treat them and make them feel good. And, and then after I worked with them, and I still continue to work with them, I thought, oh no, obviously someone like that, I'm sure, could maybe have a reputation of being a diva, which I'm not. I just want to be valued because it's not a charity. You're not reaching out to me because you think, you know what, we're feeling charitable today. Let's just find this talent and then we're gonna give them money. It's not that. It's because you see the value in me. So I want to be treated that way. So yeah, that's my whole story with brands. And I'm grateful that even my agents, they're okay with me being that way. No matter what the price tag is, if it doesn't feel like it's me, if I have to be on camera with my family and pretending to be something, then no, I'm sorry, that's not me. And I think you can really get boxed in. Once you become a mom, then maybe you're a mom influencer and that's not me. Or it's always been about how I want to truly express myself, never about what categories I could fit in, you know? And once the things align and they make sense to me, then I'll take them on.
So what do you think is the future of FemJam?
Oh.
Where do you see it going?
I see FemJam growing in many directions. And one thing I've learned to do is take my time, you know? Because to me, whether it became this huge brand, which I've never expected it to even grow to where it is, but I knew for sure I didn't want it to be everywhere. I don't want to mass produce. I don't want to do anything. I do know there is still future and creating products that are more for caring for hair, for black hair, but then there's also a future for a lifestyle, just kind of like the clothing. We released some kaftans that are doing really well, so I want to do more of those things where people know they can walk in or they can go on our website and they could find clothing that go with that lifestyle, you know, whatever that means. Just breathable, just clothes you could live in, clothes you can pass down, just like what I want the head wraps to be. I want whatever we create to represent so much more than whatever article that it is, whatever product that it is. So whether it's a kaftan that you choose to live in and take care of and then pass down, or it's a head wrap or a headband or whatever it is, I think there's room for growth in every direction. But I just have to take my time and focus on one thing at a time. Yeah, it's exciting.
As a successful business owner and also as a successful Black female, what advice would you give someone who's younger looking up to you?
Sure. I mean, as a business owner, I would say to anyone looking up to me is to ask yourself why you want to do anything. Because I think sometimes we feel like we have to do something or so much because there's a lot happening around us. And I think we're better at showing up or doing those things if we could answer those questions. Why am I doing this? Will it make me happy? Who am I doing it for? You know, all of these different questions. Once you figure that out, then yes, proceed, continue, right? And I would say as a creator, just like a creative person, a photographer or influencer or style, anything, I think we spend, at least for now, I think there's so much attention to what's trending, especially since Reels have been introduced to Instagram and everyone wants to do what's trending. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do what feels right. It's to maybe stand out, because then if everyone's doing the exact same thing, how will you grow? How will you truly find your voice? Yeah, trends are fun. I like some things that are trending, but we shouldn't only focus on what's trending and what's doing well, because sometimes we could be the trendsetters. Am I saying that you have to spend all of your energy being a trendsetter? No, but I think really spending time with yourself and being intentional really matters. So for sure that. And if you start something and no one supports you, that is probably because you have to keep going, not because you have to stop. It means that you have a lot of growth to do. You have to keep practicing. You have to remain consistent. And the more you grow, the more consistent you are, the more you grow, and then you will find your audience and what you really want to do. Because the lack of support doesn't mean that there's no space for you. It just means that you have to keep going.
Thank you so much for coming today and sharing your story and the highs and the lows. And I think it's incredible what you've done with Finding Paola and FemJam, and wish you to have all of the success in the future that you desire.
Thank you for having me and for listening to all of what I had to share. I appreciate it.